The morning I found out what my parents had done, I was standing in my tiny Denver apartment kitchen, stirring honey into my coffee while reviewing my master's thesis notes. The September air was crisp, filtering through my half-open window, carrying the scent of fallen leaves from the maple tree outside. I had just defended my thesis in environmental science 3 weeks ago, and life finally felt like it was falling into place. My phone buzzed against the granite countertop. The caller ID showed Missoula County Assessor's Office. I almost didn't answer, thinking it was some kind of telemarketer, but something made me swipe to accept. "Is this Nicole Henderson?" The woman's voice was professional, but warm. "Yes, this is Nick. How can I help you?" "I'm calling about the property tax assessment for the Henderson property on Willow Creek Road. We've been trying to reach you for months about the delinquent taxes, but our notices keep getting returned. The new owners are asking about the tax history, and we need to clarify some discrepancies." My coffee mug slipped from my fingers, shattering against the kitchen floor. Hot liquid splashed across my bare feet, but I barely noticed the sting. "I'm sorry, what new owners?" My voice came out as barely a whisper. There was a pause. "Ma'am, according to our records, the property was sold 6 months ago to Mountain Vista Development Corporation. The deed transfer was filed in March. I had been in the middle of my thesis research, buried in the university library most days, stressed about my defense. My parents had been calling me weekly, telling me how they were handling everything with Grandma Rose's property, how I shouldn't worry about the complicated paperwork while I was focused on school. "There must be some mistake," I said, my voice getting stronger. "That property was left to me. It's mine. I understand your confusion, ma'am. You might want to contact the county clerk's office. They can provide you with copies of all the documentation." I hung up and immediately called my parents' house in Billings. Dad answered on the second ring, his voice cheerful as always. "Nikki, how's my graduate daughter doing?" "Dad, I just got a call about Grandma's property. They said it was sold." I tried to keep my voice steady. The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. "Dad? Well, sweetheart, we were going to tell you. The taxes were just getting too expensive, and with you in school, we didn't want to burden you with it. We found a buyer who gave us a fair price." "You found a buyer?" "Dad, that land was left to me. You had no right to sell it." "Now hold on, Nick. We're your parents. We were looking out for your best interests. You were so stressed about school, and frankly, you don't know anything about managing property. We invested the money for you." My hands were shaking now. I could feel tears burning behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "Where's the money, Dad?" Another pause. "It's safe. We put it in a high-yield investment account. You'll thank us later." I ended the call and immediately drove to the county clerk's office. The building was one of those older government structures, all red brick and tall windows, with that particular smell of old paper and floor wax. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and graying hair, pulled up the records on her computer. "Here it is," she said, adjusting her glasses. 50 acres on Willow Creek Road, sold to Mountain Vista Development Corporation for $847,000. $847,000. I felt dizzy. "Can you show me the signature on the deed transfer?" She printed out the documents and handed them to me. There, in black ink, was my signature. Except I had never signed anything. I stared at the forgery, my stomach churning. It was a decent imitation, but I could see the differences. The way the N in Nicole was formed, the loop in the E at the end of my last name. "Ma'am, are you all right?" the clerk asked, concern evident in her voice. "This isn't my signature," I said quietly. Her expression changed immediately. "You're saying this is a forgery?" "Yes. I never signed this. I never agreed to sell this property." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You need to get yourself a lawyer, honey. And you need to do it fast. Development companies don't usually sit on land they've purchased. They've probably already started the permitting process." I drove home in a daze, my mind racing. That evening, I called my best friend Sarah, who was finishing her law degree at the University of Montana. "Nick, this is serious," she said after I explained everything. "Forgery is a felony. But more importantly, if they've already started development, it's going to be much harder to get your land back. What do I do? You need to contact a property attorney immediately. And Nick, don't talk to your parents again without a lawyer present. They just committed fraud." That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the summers I'd spent on that land with Grandma Rose. She had taught me to identify every bird that nested in the cottonwoods along Willow Creek, shown me where the best huckleberries grew, told me stories about her own grandmother who had homesteaded that land in 1892. She had specifically left it to me because she said I was the only one who truly understood its value. The next morning, I called the law office of Patricia Caldwell, a property attorney whose name I'd found online. Her reviews were excellent, and she specialized in land disputes. Miss Henderson, she said after I explained my situation, what you're describing is very serious. But I have to ask, are you prepared for what this might mean for your relationship with your parents? I thought about Grandma Rose, about the creek that ran through the property, about the old cabin where I'd spent so many peaceful afternoons reading. I thought about the lies, the forged signature, the casual way my father had dismissed my rights. Yes, I said, I'm prepared. The battle for my inheritance was about to begin. Patricia Caldwell's office was located in a converted Victorian house in downtown Denver, with creaky hardwood floors and tall windows that let in streams of golden afternoon light. When I walked in for our first meeting, I immediately felt more confident. Patricia was in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun and sharp brown eyes that seemed to see right through people's nonsense. Tell me everything from the beginning, she said, settling behind her mahogany desk with a legal pad. I explained about Grandma Rose's will, about how my parents had convinced me they were handling the property taxes while I focused on school, about the phone call that shattered my world. Patricia took detailed notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. Do you have a copy of your grandmother's original will? She asked. Yes, I kept it in my safety deposit box. I pulled out the folder I'd brought with me. She was very specific. The property goes to me, with the stipulation that it should remain in the family and not be developed. Patricia studied the document carefully. This is ironclad. Your grandmother even included language specifically preventing your parents from making decisions about the property on your behalf once you reach 21. She looked up at me. Nick, this isn't just fraud. This violates the express wishes of the deceased property owner. Over the next week, Patricia and I worked together to gather evidence. I drove up to Montana to visit the property, my heart breaking when I saw the Mountain Vista Development, future site of Willow Creek Estates sign posted at the entrance to what had been Grandma's long gravel driveway. The old cabin was still standing, but barely. The developers had clearly walked the property and marked trees for removal with bright orange spray paint. Seeing those marks felt like someone had vandalized a church. I took hundreds of photos, including close-ups of the survey stakes they'd driven into the ground where they planned to put roads. I also visited Mrs. Chen, Grandma's elderly neighbor, who had been watching the property with growing concern. Your grandmother would be rolling in her grave, Mrs. Chen said, shaking her head as we sat on her porch drinking iced tea. She made me promise to keep an eye on that land, make sure it stayed wild. When those surveyors showed up, I called your parents. Your mother told me you had decided to sell because you needed money for school. That's not true, Mrs. Chen. I never agreed to sell. Her weathered face hardened. I should have known something was wrong. Your grandmother always said you loved that land more than anyone. Mrs. Chen provided me with a written statement about the conversations she'd had with my parents, along with photos she'd taken of the surveying activity. She also gave me something invaluable: security camera footage from her property that showed my parents visiting the land multiple times with people in business suits, clearly showing the property to potential buyers. Back in Denver, Patricia had been busy too. She'd obtained all the public records related to the sale and discovered some interesting information about Mountain Vista Development Corporation. They're not just any development company, she told me during our second meeting. They specialize in high-end residential developments in scenic rural areas. Similar properties in Montana have sold for upwards of $2 million after development. $2 million? I felt sick. That's not the worst part. I contacted them directly, pretending to be interested in purchasing a lot. The sales representative told me they're planning to break your 50 acres into 25 two-acre lots, with prices starting at $180,000 per lot. I did the math quickly. Even at the minimum price, they stood to make over $4 million from my family's land. There's something else, Patricia continued. I ran a credit check on your parents. They're in serious financial trouble, Nick. Your father's business has been struggling for years, and they have over $200,000 in debt. The pieces were starting to come together. My parents hadn't just betrayed me, they had stolen from me to save themselves from financial ruin. Patricia also discovered that the lawyer who had handled the sale was Marcus Webb, a man who had been my father's friend since college, and had handled various legal matters for my family over the years. This wasn't some random attorney who might have been deceived. This was someone who knew me, who had seen my real signature many times. We need to confront Webb, Patricia said, but we need to be strategic about it. She arranged for us to visit his office in Billings under the pretense of discussing some questions about the Henderson property sale. Webb's office was in a strip mall, which immediately struck me as odd for someone handling an $847,000 transaction. Marcus Webb was a thin man in his 60s with nervous eyes and a receding hairline. When Patricia and I walked into his office, I saw him recognize me immediately, and his face went pale. "Nicole," he said, trying to sound casual. "Your parents didn't mention you were coming, My parents don't know I'm here, I said, taking a seat across from his desk. I'm here about the property sale. Oh, well, that's all settled. Everything was handled properly. Patricia leaned forward. Mr. Webb, my client has some concerns about the authenticity of her signature on the deed transfer. The color drained completely from Webb's face. He fidgeted with a pen, avoiding eye contact. I don't know what you mean. Nicole signed all the documents herself. That's interesting, Patricia said, because Nicole was in Denver the day you notarized those documents. She has university records, credit card receipts, and witness statements placing her 300 miles away. Webb was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I think this meeting is over. You should leave. As we walked to the car, Patricia was practically glowing with satisfaction. He's terrified, she said. Did you see how he couldn't look at you? He knows exactly what he did, and he knows he's in serious trouble. That evening, I called Sarah to update her on what we'd discovered. Nick, this is bigger than just your parents trying to steal your land, she said. This is a conspiracy involving multiple people committing multiple felonies. The attorney could lose his license and face criminal charges. I keep thinking about what Mrs. Chen said, I told her, about Grandma rolling over in her grave. She trusted my parents to respect her wishes. She trusted me to protect that land. You are protecting it, Sarah said firmly. You're fighting for it. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't just going to sue to get my land back. I was going to make sure everyone involved faced the consequences of what they'd done. Grandma Rose had taught me that some things were worth fighting for, no matter how difficult the battle became. The next morning, Patricia filed a lawsuit against my parents, Marcus Webb, and Mountain Vista Development Corporation. But more importantly, she also contacted the district attorney's office to report the forgery and fraud. The war for my inheritance had officially begun, and I was no longer just defending myself. I was going on the attack. The first snow of the season was falling when my parents finally called me back. It had been 2 weeks since Patricia filed the lawsuit, and I hadn't heard a word from them despite leaving multiple voicemails. I was grading undergraduate papers in my apartment when my phone rang, showing my mother's contact photo. A picture from last Christmas when we all still pretended to be a happy family. Nicole Marie Henderson, what do you think you're doing? My mother's voice was sharp, angrier than I'd ever heard her. I'm protecting my inheritance, Mom. The inheritance you stole from me. We didn't steal anything. We're your parents. We were protecting your interests while you were too busy with school to handle adult responsibilities. I set down my red pen and walked to my window, watching the snowflakes spiral down onto the busy Denver street below. Mom, you forged my signature. That's a felony. Don't be so dramatic. Marcus assured us everything was legal. Marcus Webb is going to lose his law license. Did you know that? The State Bar Association is already investigating him. There was silence on the other end. Then I heard my father's voice in the background, though I couldn't make out the words. Your father wants to talk to you, Mom said, her voice suddenly smaller. Nikki, sweetheart. Dad's voice came through the phone, using the gentle tone he'd used when I was little and had scraped my knee. This has gotten out of hand. Can't we work this out as a family? We could have worked it out as a family before you committed fraud. Look, we made some mistakes, but we can fix this. Why don't you come up here and we'll sit down and talk like adults? I almost laughed. Dad, I am being an adult. I'm holding you accountable for your actions. Nicole, you don't understand the financial pressure we've been under. The business has been struggling since the pandemic. We were going to lose everything, so you decided to steal from me instead. It wasn't stealing. His gentle tone evaporated. We raised you, fed you, put you through college. That land came from our family too. Your grandmother was my mother, and she chose to leave it to me, not you. There's a reason for that, Dad. The silence stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. Then he said, You're making a big mistake, Nicole. You think you can take us on, but you have no idea what you're up against. Marcus has been practicing law for 30 years. He says your case is weak. Then you have nothing to worry about. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen and cried for the first time since this whole nightmare began. Not just for the betrayal, but for the loss of the parents I thought I knew. The people who had raised me, who had taught me right from wrong, had looked me in the eye and lied to me while stealing everything Grandma Rose had wanted me to have. The next day, Patricia called with news that made me feel both vindicated and sick to my stomach. The district attorney is moving forward with criminal charges, she said. Your parents and Webb are all being charged with forgery and fraud. There's also going to be a racketeering charge because they worked together to commit these crimes. Racketeering? That sounds so serious. It is serious, Nick. When multiple people conspire to commit fraud involving this amount of money, prosecutors don't mess around. She also had an update on Mountain Vista Development. Their lawyers reached out to me. They claim they're innocent purchasers who had no knowledge of the fraud. They're willing to negotiate returning the property in exchange for their purchase price plus costs. What do you think? I think they're scared. A major development company doesn't want the publicity that comes with buying stolen land. If this goes to trial and gets media attention, it could damage their reputation significantly. That weekend, Sarah drove down from Missoula to visit me. We went to our favorite coffee shop near the university, settling into a corner booth where we could talk privately. "How are you holding up?" she asked, studying my face with the concern only a best friend can show. "I feel like I'm living in some alternate reality where my parents are criminals," I said, stirring sugar into my latte. Last month, my biggest worry was whether my thesis advisor would approve my research methodology. Now I'm a victim in a criminal case. "You know what I think?" Sarah said. "I think your grandmother would be proud of you. You could have just accepted their story, let them get away with it. Instead, you're fighting not just for yourself, but for her memory and her wishes." That afternoon, Sarah and I drove up to the mountains outside Denver. I needed to clear my head, and there was something about being in nature that always helped me think more clearly. We hiked to a small lake surrounded by aspen trees, their golden leaves carpeting the trail. "I keep wondering if I'm doing the right thing," I told her as we sat on a fallen log beside the water. "They're my parents. This is going to destroy them. Nick, they made their choice when they decided to commit fraud. You didn't force them to do that. But the criminal charges... Dad could go to prison." Sarah was quiet for a moment, watching a hawk circle overhead. "My grandmother used to tell me that sometimes loving someone means holding them accountable for their actions. Enabling bad behavior isn't love, it's fear." That evening, I called Mrs. Chen to update her on the legal proceedings. "I'm proud of you, dear," she said. "Your grandmother always said you had a strong moral compass. She worried about your parents, you know." "What do you mean?" "She never said much, but I got the impression she thought they were too focused on money, not enough on what really mattered. That's why she left the land to you specifically." The next Monday, I received a call that changed everything. It was from a detective with the Montana State Police named Detective Rodriguez. "Miss Henderson, I'm calling about the criminal case against your parents and Marcus Webb. We've discovered some additional information that you need to know about." "What kind of information?" "It appears this wasn't their first time doing something like this. We found evidence that they've been systematically stealing from your grandmother's estate for the past 3 years, since before she died." I felt the room spin around me. "What do you mean?" "Your grandmother had several bank accounts and some valuable antiques. Your parents were listed as co-signers on her accounts to help her with her banking when she got older, but they were withdrawing money without her knowledge. After she died, they sold several valuable items that were supposed to go to you according to the will." The detective continued, "We estimate they took over $150,000 from her while she was alive, plus another $75,000 worth of property after she died." I hung up the phone and immediately called Patricia. "This changes everything," she said after I told her what the detective had discovered. "This isn't just about the land anymore. This is about a pattern of elder abuse and estate theft." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Grandma Rose's last year, how she had seemed confused about her finances, how she'd mentioned that her bank statements didn't look right. I had attributed it to her age, maybe early signs of dementia. The truth was so much worse. My parents hadn't just betrayed me. They had betrayed and stolen from their own mother while she was alive and vulnerable. The people I had loved and trusted my entire life were not who I thought they were. The next morning, I made a decision that would change the course of the entire case. I called Detective Rodriguez back. "I want to testify," I said. "Not just about the land sale, but about everything. If they did this to me and to Grandma Rose, they might have done it to other people too." "Miss Henderson, are you sure? This is going to be very difficult. You'll be testifying against your own parents." "I'm sure," I said, thinking about Grandma Rose counting her pills, worried about having enough money for her medications while my parents were stealing from her accounts. They need to be stopped. The Montana courthouse was an imposing limestone building that had stood in downtown Billings since 1924. As I walked up the wide stone steps on the morning of the trial, I felt the weight of 3 generations of Henderson women on my shoulders. I was wearing Grandma Rose's pearl earrings and carrying her old leather purse, small talismans that gave me courage. Patricia walked beside me, carrying 2 large briefcases filled with evidence. "Remember, Nick, just answer the questions truthfully and directly. Don't let them intimidate you." Inside, the courtroom was exactly like something from a movie. Dark wood paneling, high ceilings, and rows of spectator benches. I was surprised to see how many people had come to watch. Mrs. Chen was there, along with several other neighbors from the area around Grandma's property. Sarah had driven over from Missoula and was sitting in the front row, giving me an encouraging smile. My parents were already seated at the defendant's table with their lawyer, a stern-looking man in his 60s named Richard Blackwood. Dad was wearing his best suit, the navy one he'd worn to my graduation. Mom was in a black dress that made her look older than her 58 years. Neither of them looked in my direction. Marcus Webb sat at a separate table with his own attorney, a young woman who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. Webb kept fidgeting with his tie and avoiding eye contact with everyone. The prosecutor, District Attorney Jennifer Martinez, was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who had built her career on white-collar crime cases. She had prepared me thoroughly for my testimony, but I still felt nervous butterflies in my stomach. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Catherine Morrison," the bailiff announced. Judge Morrison was a woman in her early 60s with silver hair and sharp blue eyes. She had a reputation for being fair but tough, especially in cases involving family conflicts. The prosecution's opening statement was devastating. DA Martinez laid out the timeline of events, the evidence of forgery, and the pattern of theft from Grandma Rose's estate. She used charts and photographs to show how my parents had systematically looted their own mother's assets while she was vulnerable. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Martinez said, "this case is about more than just money. It's about trust, family bonds, and the sacred duty we have to protect our elderly relatives. The defendants violated that trust in the most fundamental way possible." Richard Blackwood's opening statement focused on painting me as an ungrateful daughter who was trying to destroy her family over a property dispute. He argued that my parents had acted in my best interests, making difficult decisions while I was busy with school. "The prosecution wants you to believe that loving parents who made sacrifices for their daughter's education are criminals," he said. "But the truth is, Nicole Henderson is a young woman who doesn't understand the complexities of managing real estate and family finances." I felt my face flush with anger at his condescending tone, but Patricia squeezed my hand under the table, reminding me to stay calm. The first witness was Detective Rodriguez, who presented the evidence of the forged documents and the financial records showing the systematic theft from Grandma Rose's accounts. He was professional and thorough, methodically explaining how the investigation had uncovered the full scope of the crimes. Then came the forensic handwriting expert, who testified that my signature on the deed transfer was definitely a forgery. She used enlarged photographs to show the jury the specific differences between my real signature and the fake one. Mrs. Chen's testimony was particularly powerful. She spoke about her friendship with Grandma Rose, about how my grandmother had been worried about her finances in her final year. "Rose kept saying her bank statements didn't make sense," Mrs. Chen testified. "She would call me crying, saying she was afraid she wouldn't have enough money for her medications. I offered to help her, but she said her son was handling everything. When it was my turn to testify, I felt like I was walking in slow motion to the witness stand. I could feel my parents' eyes on me, but I forced myself to look straight ahead." DA Martinez began with gentle questions about my relationship with Grandma Rose, about the summers I'd spent on the property, about her will and her intentions for the land. "Did you ever give your parents permission to sell the property?" Martinez asked. "No, I did not." "Did you ever sign any documents related to the sale of the property?" "No, I did not." "When did you first learn that the property had been sold?" I recounted the phone call from the county assessor's office, the shock of discovery, the confrontation with my parents. I kept my voice steady, but I could feel tears threatening when I talked about seeing the development signs on Grandma's land. Then came the cross-examination. Richard Blackwood was aggressive from the start, trying to portray me as irresponsible and naive. "Miss Henderson, isn't it true that you were too busy with your studies to pay attention to your family's financial situation?" "I was working on my master's degree, yes." "And isn't it true that you had no experience managing property or paying property taxes?" "I had no experience because I was never given the opportunity to learn, but you were happy to let your parents handle all the complicated paperwork while you focused on your education, weren't you?" I felt my temper rising. I trusted my parents to respect my grandmother's wishes and my legal rights. That trust was betrayed. Blackwood's strategy became clear. He was trying to make me look like a spoiled young woman who had suddenly decided to get greedy. He questioned me about my student loans, my job prospects, my financial situation. "Isn't it convenient that you only became concerned about this property after you learned it was worth nearly $1 million? "I became concerned when I learned it had been stolen from me," I said firmly. The most dramatic moment came when DA Martinez called Marcus Webb to the stand. Webb's own attorney had advised him to plead the Fifth Amendment, but the prosecutor had granted him immunity in exchange for his testimony. Webb looked terrible. He'd lost weight, and his hands shook as he was sworn in. Under oath, he admitted that he had known the signature was forged. "Mr. Webb, did you personally witness Nicole Henderson sign the deed transfer documents?" "No, I did not." "Then how did you notarize the documents?" Webb was quiet for a long moment. Tom Henderson asked me to do it as a favor. He said Nicole had signed the papers but couldn't come in person because she was in Denver. Did you know that notarizing a document without witnessing the signature is illegal? Yes, I knew that. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of someone crying. I turned to see my mother with her face in her hands. Why did you agree to do this illegal favor for Mr. Henderson? Martinez asked. Because Tom owed me money. A lot of money. He said if I helped him with this, he'd pay me back. This was news to me. I looked at Patricia, who was taking notes furiously. How much money did Mr. Henderson owe you? $50,000. I had loaned it to him 2 years ago when his business was failing. The web of lies and financial desperation was becoming clearer. My parents hadn't just stolen from Grandma Rose and me. They had been in debt to their own lawyer, creating a conflict of interest that compromised everything. When court recessed for lunch, I sat in the hallway with Patricia and Sarah, trying to process what I'd just heard. This is going better than I expected, Patricia said. Webb's testimony is devastating to their defense. I can't believe Dad owed him money, I said. It explains why Webb was willing to break the law. It also explains why your parents were so desperate, Sarah added. They weren't just in debt to credit cards and banks. They owed money to friends and colleagues. As we walked back into the courtroom for the afternoon session, I caught my father's eye for the first time since the trial began. He looked broken, older than his 62 years. For a moment, I felt a pang of sympathy for him. But then I remembered Grandma Rose, worried about her medication money while her own son was stealing from her. I remembered the orange paint marks on the trees she had loved. I remembered the forged signature and the lies. The afternoon would bring my parents' testimony, and I knew that whatever happened next would determine not just the outcome of the trial, but the future of our family forever. The moment I had been dreading finally arrived when my father took the witness stand. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of everything that had been revealed. His hands trembled slightly as he placed them on the Bible to be sworn in. Richard Blackwood tried to paint Dad as a desperate man who had made poor choices but had good intentions. Under direct examination, Dad spoke about his failing construction business, about watching his life's work crumble during the pandemic, about the shame of not being able to provide for his family the way he always had. I never meant to hurt Nicole, he said, his voice breaking slightly. Everything I did, I thought I was protecting her. She was so focused on her studies, so stressed about her future. I didn't want her to worry about property taxes and legal complications. But DA Martinez's cross-examination was relentless. She forced him to confront the timeline of his actions, the systematic theft from his own mother, the deliberate deception of his daughter. Mr. Henderson, you testified that you were trying to protect your daughter. Is that why you forged her signature? I knew she would have agreed if she understood the situation. But you didn't give her the chance to understand, did you? You made that decision for her. Yes. And when you were taking money from your mother's accounts, were you protecting her too? Dad's composure finally cracked. My mother was getting confused. She wasn't managing her money well. I was trying to help. By stealing from her, I was going to pay it back. With what money, Mr. Henderson? Your business was failing. You owed money to your lawyer. You had no source of income to pay back what you stole. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of my mother crying quietly. I felt tears running down my own cheeks, not just for the betrayal, but for the complete destruction of the father I had once admired. My mother's testimony was even more heartbreaking. She admitted to knowing about the forged signature, about the money taken from Grandma Rose's accounts. She claimed she had been afraid to speak up, afraid of what would happen to their family if the truth came out. I kept telling myself we would find a way to make it right, she said through tears. But then it got too big, too complicated. I didn't know how to stop it. During the recess, I stepped outside the courthouse for fresh air. The November sky was gray and heavy with the promise of snow. Sarah found me sitting on a bench, staring at the bare trees lining the street. You okay? She asked, settling beside me. I keep thinking about when I was 12 and Dad taught me to drive his old pickup truck on Grandma's property, I said. He was so patient, so proud when I finally got it right. That man wouldn't have stolen from his own daughter. People change, Nick. Or maybe we just see them more clearly sometimes. The closing arguments were powerful on both sides. DA Martinez summarized the evidence methodically, emphasizing that this was about more than money. It was about fundamental trust and the protection of vulnerable people. The defendants didn't just steal property and money, she told the jury. They stole from a young woman's future and from an elderly woman's security. They violated the most basic bonds of family and friendship. Richard Blackwood made one final attempt to portray my parents as victims of circumstances, people who had made mistakes but didn't deserve to have their lives destroyed. Tom and Linda Henderson are not criminals, he argued. They are parents who made poor decisions under extreme financial pressure. They are asking for your mercy." The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood to read the verdict. On the charge of fraud in the first degree, we find the defendant, Thomas Henderson, guilty. My father's legs gave out, and he collapsed into his chair. My mother let out a sound that was part sob, part wail. On the charge of forgery, we find the defendant, Thomas Henderson, guilty. The verdicts continued. Guilty on all counts for both my parents and for Marcus Webb. The weight of those words settled over the courtroom like a heavy blanket. Judge Morrison scheduled sentencing for the following month, but she addressed the defendants immediately. "I want to be clear," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen too many families destroyed by greed and deception. "This court takes these crimes very seriously. You violated the trust of your own family members, including an elderly woman who relied on you for protection. After the trial, there were still civil matters to resolve. Mountain Vista Development, facing the prospect of holding title to stolen land, quickly agreed to return the property to me in exchange for their purchase price plus costs. Patricia negotiated a settlement that also required them to restore the land to its original condition, removing all the survey stakes and development markers. The criminal sentencing hearing was held on a cold December morning. My parents each received 2 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 months. Marcus Webb received 1 year and the permanent loss of his law license. Before the judge pronounced sentence, she allowed victim impact statements. I had written a letter, but when the moment came, I found myself speaking from the heart instead. Your Honor, I want to say that I forgive my parents. I don't excuse what they did, and I believe they need to face the consequences of their actions. But I also remember the people who raised me, who taught me right from wrong, who supported my dreams. Those people are still in there somewhere, and I hope that someday we can find a way to rebuild our relationship." My mother was crying openly as I spoke. My father looked at me for the first time since the trial began, and I saw something in his eyes that might have been gratitude. 6 months later, I was standing in Grandma Rose's old cabin, which I had spent the spring renovating. The developers had left it structurally sound, and I had restored it to its original condition, using old photographs and Mrs. Chen's memories. Sarah was visiting for the weekend, helping me organize the books and personal items that had been returned to me as part of the estate settlement. "You know what I found in your grandmother's papers?" Sarah said, holding up a handwritten letter. "She wrote this to you but never sent it." I took the letter, recognizing Grandma's careful handwriting immediately. "My dearest Nick," it read, "I know that someday you will face challenges that test your character and your resolve. When that time comes, remember that doing the right thing is rarely easy, but it is always worth it. The land I'm leaving you is not just property. It's a reminder that some things are worth fighting for, even when the fight is difficult and painful. I trust you to protect what matters and to stand up for what is right, even when it costs you something precious. All my love, Grandma Rose." I sat down heavily in Grandma's old rocking chair, tears streaming down my face. "She knew," I said to Sarah. "Somehow she knew this would happen. She knew you'd have the strength to handle it," Sarah replied. That evening, I received a letter from my mother. She was writing from the minimum security facility where she was serving her sentence. The letter was full of apologies and explanations, but one paragraph stood out. "I understand if you never forgive us for what we did, but I want you to know that watching you fight for what was right, even when it meant fighting us, made me proud. You are stronger and more principled than your father and I ever were. Your grandmother would be proud, too." I walked out onto the cabin's small porch and looked out over the 50 acres that were now truly mine. The cottonwoods along Willow Creek were just beginning to bud with spring growth. I could hear the water running over the rocks, the same sound that had lulled me to sleep during childhood summers. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. The DA's office called. "Your parents are eligible for work release in 6 months. They want to know if you'd be willing to write a letter supporting their application." I thought about forgiveness, about justice, about the difference between excusing someone's actions and offering them a chance at redemption. I thought about Grandma Rose's letter and her faith in my ability to do the right thing, even when it was difficult. I typed back, "Yes, I'll write the letter." The next morning, I began writing, not just the letter for my parents' work release, but the first chapter of my doctoral dissertation on environmental conservation and family land stewardship. The property that had been stolen from me and then returned would become the foundation for my research, a living laboratory where I could study sustainable land management practices. As I wrote, I realized that the fight for my inheritance had given me something even more valuable than the land itself. It had shown me who I really was. Not just someone who could stand up for herself, but someone who could seek justice while still leaving room for mercy. Grandma Rose had been right. Some things are worth fighting for, even when the fight breaks your heart. And sometimes, the most important victory isn't getting what you want. It's becoming who you're meant to be in the process of fighting for it. The land was mine now, legally and completely. But more importantly, I had proven to myself that I was worthy of the trust Grandma Rose had placed in me. I would protect this place, not just from developers, but as a sanctuary for future generations who might need a reminder that some things, family loyalty, environmental stewardship, and the courage to do what's right, are worth any price. That night, I slept peacefully in Grandma's cabin for the first time in over a year, lulled by the sound of Willow Creek and the knowledge that I had honored both the letter and the spirit of her final gift to me.